They were the same. Even in the haze of that moment, they pierced me, down to my soul. "Fancy meeting you here," Rhodes said. Despite black bruises that ringed his eyes, a twinkle from somewhere deep within looked back at me. "Happy 16th birthday," he said, and extended a hand. Rhodes gripped a glass of water. I sat up, took it from him, and finished it in 3 large gulps. The cold water trickled down the back of my throat, flowed down my esophagus, and into my stomach. Blood, a substance I was used to, trickled, but its absorption into the vampire body was a lot like a sponge soaking up liquid. It had been so long since I had a drink of water. In Rhodes' other hand was a piece of black cloth, and when I took it from him, the cloth cascaded out to reveal a black dress. It was lightweight cotton. I pressed up from the floor and stood up. My knees buckled, but I steadied myself by throwing my arms out for balance. I stood there for a moment until I was firmly planted to the ground. When I tried to walk, a small vibration shook me so hard that my knees touched. "Put that on, and then come in the other room," Rhodes said, and lumbered unevenly out of the bedroom. I should have noticed that he had to hold on to the doorframe when he walked, but my knees and thighs trembled, and I had to try and find my balance again. I let my hands fall back to my sides. My brown hair unfurled and like seaweed, strands stuck to my naked body. Longer strands reached my breasts. I would have given anything for a mirror. I took a few breaths and my knees wobbled again. I looked around for a corset, but there was nothing. How curious. Was I meant to walk around this place with nothing to hold me in? I slid the dress over my head and it stopped right above my knees. I didn't look a day over 16, yet if someone had calculated on that particular day, I officially turned 592. Everything was so crisp and bright, too bright. Beams of light trickled minute rainbows across my feet. I looked around the room. Despite waking up on the floor, there was a mattress and an iron bed frame covered by a black comforter. Across the room, a bay window looked out at full leaves and swaying branches. Beneath the window was a seat covered in blue plush pillows. I ran my fingertips against the texture wood of the walls and couldn't believe that I could actually feel it. The wood was layered, and I felt the raised and jagged parts under my smooth fingertips. My existence as a vampire meant that all my nerve endings were dead. Only by remembering what things felt like as a human would my vampire mind understand whether I was touching something soft or hard. The only senses a vampire retained were those that heightened her ability to kill. The sense of smell was linked to flesh and blood. Sight was super sight, detailed down to the minutiae, its sole purpose to find prey within an instant. My fingers fluttered over the wall again. Another rush of shivers rolled up my arms. "There will be time for that," Rhodes said from the other room. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I could taste the salt as I walked. The muscles in my thighs and calves seemed to burn, twitch, and then relax. In order to stop shaking, I rested my body weight on the doorway and crossed my hands over my chest. "What century is this?" I asked, closing my eyes and taking a breath. "The 21st, Rhodes said. His black hair, which reached halfway down his back the last time I saw him, had been cut short and now stood up in a spiky hairstyle. Around his right wrist was a white medical bandage. "Sit," he whispered. I sat down on the pale blue couch that faced the lounger. "You look terrible." "Thank you," he said with the barest glimmer of a smile. Rhodes' cheeks were so sunken that his once masculine carved features now clung to his bones. His usual gold skin had yellowed. His arms quivered as he lowered himself into the chair, holding onto it till he was almost fully sitting down. "Tell me everything," I commanded. "Give me a moment," he said. "Where are we?" "Your new home." Rhodes closed his eyes. He leaned his head back on his chair. He gripped the armrests, and I noticed that the rings that had once adorned his fingers were now gone. The curling black snake with the emerald eyes, and the poison ring for emergencies, they were missing. Only one ring remained on his pinky finger, my ring, the ring that I had worn for 500 years. Only then did I notice that my own hands were bare. It was a tiny silver band with a dark black stone, onyx. "Never wear onyx unless you want or know death," he once told me. I believed him. Besides, up until that moment, I was confident no vampire enjoyed creating death more than I did. I tried to avoid his gaze. I'd never seen Rhodes so weak. "You're human, Lena," he said. I nodded once in acknowledgement, though I looked at the lines on the hardwood floor. I couldn't respond. I'd wanted it too much. The last interaction I had with Rhodes before waking up in that bedroom was about my desire to be human. We had an argument, one that I thought would last for centuries. It did, in a way. The argument had happened a century before that moment. "You finally got what you wanted," he whispered. I'm going to move on. What? That was good?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Just waiting on every word.
That's right. You know, I think it's my radio DJ training. I was a radio DJ in my past life. 96 through the rose. I'm going to read. I have a few more. I know. It's now sports talk. I'm going to read 3 pages from the middle. And this is when Lena is already at Wickham boarding school, and she's already a human student. And she's just met her friend, Tony. And it's funny because as a writer, debut author, when you first, I'm telling you this is totally true. When it happens to you, you'll know. You put Google alerts on to tell yourself whenever anybody writes anything about you on the internet ever. And the mistake was that I found out like everybody liked Tony. And so when you read the book, you'll find out why this is very interesting to me as the writer. So this is right after she meets Tony. I turned those Google alerts off, just so you know. And she is walking down the Art Tower stairs, which is where Tony spends a lot of his time. It's a building on campus, the boarding school. She's coming down the Art Tower stairs, and it's raining. And she's looking out the window at the rain, and it causes her to have a memory. And this is the memory. Hampstead, England, apple orchard, 1417. The rain fell on the roof of my father's house. We lived in a small 2-story manor behind the grounds of a monastery. The monks were far up from the orchard, separated from our home by 2 great meadows of apple trees. My father was an orphan, entrusted to the care of the monks upon his childhood. There they taught him about growing apples. It was the middle of the night, and the rain fell against the roof in an easy rhythm. I sat in a rocking chair looking out at my family orchard. The house was silent despite the pattern of the rain and my father's snores echoing downstairs. The embers of the nightly fire still lingered, and my feet were warm. It was the beginning of autumn, and it was warmer than anyone had anticipated. Although it was early September, my family rested easier. We had already sent the first batch of our prized apples to the Royal Medici family in Italy. I was dressed in a white nightgown. In those days, the night dresses were flowing and sheer. If someone wanted to, they could have seen all of my 15-year-old self. My hair was still long and brown, but it hung in a loose braid over my left breast and stopped somewhere near my belly button. Through the wet window, rows and rows of orchards stretched into the darkness, and somewhere to the right in the distance was a tiny orange glow of candlelight from the rectangular windows of the monastery. I rocked back and forth in the chair, lazily watching the rain. I reached up to remove my mother's earrings that she had let me borrow that morning. When I touched my earlobe, I realized the right one was gone. I stood up from the chair, the last place I had them. Where was the last place I had them? My father had complimented the glint of the gold in the sun in the last row of the orchard. Before thinking twice, I was out the door. I ran through the rows and fell to my knees. I crawled up and down the last row. I didn't care about the time of the night or that my chemise would be sullied and dirty from the rich earth. I couldn't bring myself to look at my mother's face, and I told her I'd lost one of her favorite earrings. She would caress my face, tell me it was only an earring, and mask her disappointment. I let the rain coat my face and was crawling from one end of the row to the other when a pair of black, silver-buckled boots stepped into my view. These were not the high heels that we are accustomed to in the modern world. These boots were low heels, made from thick hide and covered the man's legs all the way up to his shins. I followed the length of his legs, up his body, until I looked into the most piercing set of blue eyes I had ever seen or ever would see. They were framed by dark eyebrows that highlighted the man's masculine jawbone and thin nose. "Having an adventure?" he asked casually, as if he were wondering about the weather. Rode Lewin squatted down on his heels. He had shaggy hair then. As always, he had a proud mouth and a constantly furrowed brow. I was almost 16, had never left my parents' orchard, and the most beautiful man in the world stood in front of me. Well, he looked like a man. Though he could have been young, perhaps my own age, there was something in the way he looked at me that told me this boy, despite his smooth cheeks and the youthful expression, was much older than me. As though he had seen the whole world and knew of its many secrets. Rode wore an all-black ensemble, which made the color of his eyes pop out at me from the impenetrable night. I fell back on the ground. It was wet, and I was soaked through. The mud squished under my heels, and as I pressed into the ground to move away from the man in front of me, "This is private property," I said. Rode stood back up, placed his hands on his hips, and looked in both directions. "You don't say," he said, pretending as though he didn't know where he was. "What do you want?" I asked. I leaned back onto my hands and looked up at Rode. He walked closer, so there was only a foot of space between us, and extended a hand. I noticed an onyx ring on his middle finger. It was different from any gem I had ever seen before. It was black, solid, flat, without any glint or sparkle. He opened his fingers, and in the middle of his palm was my mother's hoop earring. I looked at the hoop, and then into Rhode's eyes. He smiled at me in such a way that I instantly felt something within me that I had never felt before. something tingled near my heart. I stood up quickly, all the while keeping my eyes on the man in front of me. The rain splattered onto the wet ground. I reached out for the earring, my fingers shaking. I was about to touch the gold when I thought for sure he would close his fingers around mine. The rain fell onto his hand, onto me, and his palm was slick with drops. I looked up at Rode and snatched the earring with a flick of the wrist and placed my hand back by my side. "Thank you," I barely whispered and turned back toward my family's home. In the distance I could discern the flat shape of the roof, even in the dark, rainy night. "I have to go, and so should you," I said, walking away from him. Rode turned me back to face him with one hand on my left shoulder. "I've been watching you," he said, "for some time now." "I've never seen you," I said, and raised my chin in defiance. I didn't realize I was showing him my neck. "The problem for you is that I'm in love with you," Rode said, though it sounded more like a confession. "You can't be in love with me," I said stupidly. "You do not know me." "Don't I? I watch you carefully tend to your father's orchard. I watch the way you braid your hair in your bedroom window. Then when you walk, you glow, as bright as a candle flame. I have known for some time that I must have you near me. I know you, Lena. I know how you breathe." "I don't love you," I said without a clue why I said it. My chest shuddered with every breath I took. "Oh, come now," Rode said and cocked his head to the side. "Don't you?" I did. I loved that he looked rugged, though his skin was flawless and completely polished. He could have told me he slayed a dragon with both hands tied behind his back, and I would have believed it possible. Perhaps it was the allure of being in the presence of a vampire. I didn't know at that moment that Rode was a vampire. But the more time that passes, the more I am sure that I fell for him in that very instant. Rode looked me up and down, and I realized he could see through my sleeping gown. He ran a fingertip from my throat down through the middle of my breast and ended at my belly button. I shuddered. Out of nowhere, he hooked a hand around my waist and brought me against him. It all happened so languidly, as though it were choreographed. The slap of our wet bodies when Rode brought me close, and the feel of his palm on my forehead as he wiped a string of hair out of my eyes. He groaned when he met my eyes, and in that moment, Rode sunk his teeth into my neck so fast that I didn't notice the sound of my skin breaking. Thank you. That's that. That's Rode. He's also really popular on the Google Alerts.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. Questions?
Somebody?
How do you pronounce your heroine's name?
Lena Budante.
Lena.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Budante is actually a medieval name. Lena is not. I made it up. Fiction. Fiction. Somebody told me, someone fabulous who's in this room, told me that it means, what does it mean? Heidi just called it out. Heidi runs the official Facebook Twilight page that has 10 million followers. 11 million followers.
Pretty amazing.
It's amazing. She's the one half to do that runs that official Twilight Facebook page. If you're not on it, you should be.
This is Jen from the Lexicon.
Oh, hi! Oh, Twilight Lexicon. Cool. I didn't know that. Your friend telling me these things. So yeah, that's I just wanted somebody's name that just sounded as epic as Lena is.